Hi, good morning, and happy Valentine's Day to those of you in America, and happy late Valentine's Day to everybody in Australia. So, with this being the Valentine's weekend, I do want to go over the most important relationship that you have in your life. And you probably already know that it is your relationship with yourself, because this relationship that you have with you is what's going to be the foundation of all the other relationships in your life. And sometimes we might think that having a relationship with the right person, like your partner, soulmate, anybody like that, is gonna make you happy. And, yes, people can make you happy, and being in a great relationship is amazing. And I hope that all of you have great relationships. But it is not that person's job to make you happy, if that makes sense. And we're going to dive into that a little bit more. So first off this morning, I want to ask you a question, because sometimes we can be a little harsh with ourselves. And the first thing I want to ask is, if somebody spoke to you the way that you speak to yourself, what would you say to them? Are you being nice to yourself? Sometimes we're not that nice to ourselves. And if somebody was really mean to you all the time, would you just be okay with that? Would you let that fly? Just think about that for a second. Because we sometimes say stuff in our own heads to ourselves that we would never imagine saying to anybody else, because they are so mean. And, it can be a little bit more right now, this weekend, because all over social media, people are posting love notes, talking about being soulmates forever, doing big love displays for their partners, and so on, so on. And if you don't have a very regulated, down-to-earth nervous system, sometimes you can be a little bit more harsh. But I do want you to remember that in comparing yourself to that, you are comparing your real everyday life to somebody else's curated highlight reel, because let's be honest, that's what people do when they post on the internet. They're not, most of the time, some people do, but most of the time people are not posting, the bad stuff, like the fights they're having. Oh my gosh, we broke up. Oh, this happened, whatever. They're only posting the good stuff for you to see. And that's just, human nature. That's what we want to do. But I want you to remember that when you do see these things, okay? You're looking at a highlight reel. But the thing is when you start comparing yourself to that, your brain isn't interpreting this as harmless. It's interpreting it as social positioning, because there is circuitry in our brain that overlaps with physical pain when we experience social rejection. And this is because humans have evolved in tribes. So it's really, really important for us to fit in that tribe and not be rejected. Because if you were rejected, that means death. You wouldn't have shelter, you wouldn't have food, you wouldn't be taken care of by your tribe. And that's why it matters so much for us. Even if we say, oh, I don't care, I don't need anybody, on a biological level, you actually do. So that's why it hurts so much when you feel rejected. But when you perceive yourself as behind, excluded, less than somebody else, your nervous system, it actually registers this as a threat. Your cortisol is going to rise. Your amygdala, the little fear center, danger center part of your brain, is going to get activated, and you're going to start internalizing this threat. And you might think things like, oh, this should be my relationship. Why don't I have a relationship like that? I should be further in life. I should be prettier. I should look better. Why am I like this? Just some mean things that sometimes can come up. And it happens to everybody. It does. So it is normal, because, again, we are comparing because that social positioning is so important. And our brains are really, really bad at distinguishing between something that is an external attack and something that is an internal attack. So when you start criticizing yourself, your threat detection system is going to activate. And it's the same as if somebody else said something mean to you like that. So if you're constantly just like, oh, I'm not pretty enough, let's say that one, because a lot of girls, that is something that comes up a lot because, models, all of that, again, very curated stuff, it can have a really damaging effect. And saying this to yourself would be the same as somebody else coming up to you and saying, you're not pretty enough. So just be aware of that. And when we do this over and over, our nervous system starts to become more reactive. Okay? We're becoming more sensitive to tone, more prone to overanalyzing texts, more likely to interpret ambiguity as rejection as well. And then maybe we start to think that this anxiety has something to do with the other person, when in reality, it is an internal threat that you have created inside of yourself. And I want to talk about attachment styles because this is very important. And attachment patterns are something that show up early in childhood, okay? And they're not personality traits. I want you to know this. This is not a little personality sorter, and this is something that you can change. Now, like I said, they form early in your life as a child because when you are little, you don't get to decide the type of person or who you're going to be in relationships because you are just learning. That's what children are doing. They're taking in the entire world. They're getting these relationship connections and they're learning. So if connection feels consistent and safe, then your nervous system learns that closeness is something that is stable. But if that connection felt unpredictable or overwhelming, emotionally distant, then our nervous system adjusts for that because our nervous system is very adaptable. So let's talk first about the secure attachment style. And a secure attachment is something that develops when a child's emotional experiences are acknowledged and responded to consistently. Now, that doesn't mean perfectly, because nobody's perfect, no parents are perfect, but it just means that the parents or the caregivers responded enough and appropriately. So that child's nervous system learns that distress can be soothed, conflict does not equal abandonment, and that your needs don't push people away. And as adults, securely attached people can tolerate intimacy and independence at the same time. They can express their needs without feeling like they're gonna, push you away, and they can have their own space without feeling a sense of abandonment. Their internal dialogue tends to reflect this type of stability, and when they make mistakes, they correct behavior and they take responsibility instead of attacking the other person because their nervous system has a regulated baseline. And then there's anxious attachment style. And I feel like this is one that gets talked about a lot, so you might already know a little bit about this one. But this type of attachment develops in environments where love was present, but it was inconsistent. Sometimes the caregiver paid a lot of attention to the child, and sometimes they didn't. So here, this child's nervous system learns that connection can disappear. And these people usually develop a hypervigilance and are constantly monitoring facial expressions, tone shifts, and subtle cues in the environment because to them as a child, this is survival. And as adults, anxious attachment can show up as overthinking, needing a lot of reassurance, a huge fear of being replaced, or intense reactions to perceived distance or feeling abandoned. And many anxiously attached people also practice self-abandonment, which means they override their own needs in order to maintain closeness to another person. And they don't necessarily clearly express what they need in order to avoid conflict, because they feel like if they ask for something, that they're being too much and they're going to get shut down and pushed away. So internally, their dialogue might sound like, don't be too much, or you're too much, you need to chill out, don't upset this person, you need to make yourself smaller, or something like that. Because the internal abandonment that happens when you have an anxious attachment style, it reinforces this external fear. Because again, like I said previously, your brain cannot tell the difference between what is being said to you and what you are saying to yourself. So if you are consistently leaving yourself and abandoning what you need in order to keep someone else, your nervous system is going to stay in this unstable state. And then there's the avoidant attachment style. So this one is a little bit different. It develops in homes where emotions were not really welcomed. So maybe as a child you cried and you were told you were being dramatic and to suck it up and stop. Maybe when you were upset, you were told to calm down and nobody comforted you. Or maybe your feelings in general were just ignored. So over time, you learn that expressing emotions does not feel safe, and you need to internalize that. So this can start to develop as something where closeness starts to feel dangerous, because as a child, you never got that comfort. And distance to you equals safety, and emotional independence is something that is protective for you. And as adults, avoidant patterns can kind of show up as discomfort with vulnerability, difficulty relying on other people, and pulling away when there's a sense of intimacy. But internally, avoidant attachment often includes self-dismissal. So you're dismissing your own emotions. And you might say to yourself, you're fine, you don't need anybody, stop being dramatic, it's not that big of a deal, suck it up. And this emotional suppression starts to become normal, and it's something that happens automatically. But what happens when you do this is you're not creating security, you're creating numbness internally. And numbness is something that's going to limit intimacy. And when you do that, you're not going to be able to be intimate with other partners if you cannot be intimate with yourself. And the last one that we're going to talk about here is the disorganized attachment. So this typically develops in homes where the person you depended on for comfort was also the person who really scared you or made you feel extremely confused. Maybe they were loving one minute and then explosive the next. Maybe they hugged you immediately after yelling at you. And your nervous system here learns that the same person who feels safe and comforting also feels unsafe and unpredictable at the same time. And as adults, this can manifest as really, really intense push-pull dynamics. So you might crave closeness, but also be so afraid of it at the same time. And you might idolize someone, but you also really distrust them. Internally, this can also feel really chaotic because your inner voice is flipping constantly back and forth. One day you're being really, really mean to yourself, and the next you're telling yourself that you don't need anybody and you're completely fine. This is something that's really inconsistent, and calmness and steadiness to the person that has this type of attachment style can feel unfamiliar because chaos is what you got used to. And unfortunately, a lot of people with this attachment style can end up in abusive relationships because that is what is perceived as passion and love and stability, calmness. That's not seen as love because it's not something that you were taught as a child. And understanding where you sit here is not about labeling yourself permanently. It's just about awareness. We really need to be aware of what type of attachment style we have because they are conditioned nervous system responses. And it matters so much because if your internal dialogue is reinforcing something negative, then you're going to stay in that negative pattern. It's something that just keeps you in this loop. And if you're anxiously attached, your internal voice is going to be harsh to you and your nervous system is going to remain hypervigilant. If you're avoidant, your internal voice is going to dismiss your emotional needs. And you're going to struggle to tolerate closeness if you are avoidant, or if you have the disorganized tendencies. Your self-talk is going to swing back and forth dramatically, and you're just going to stay confused about what actually feels safe to you. Now, healing attachment is something that begins internally. And this is why this relationship with you, yours that you have with yourself, is so important. Secure attachment to others requires secure attachment to yourself. So that means becoming aware of when you abandon yourself, when you brush off your emotional needs, when you avoid what you need in order to feel like you need to make somebody else happy. You have to notice when you dismiss this stuff and when you criticize yourself, because all of this is normal human emotions. And instead of being dismissive, we just need to acknowledge. And the great thing about our brains, our human brains, is we have neuroplasticity. And this is something that allows us to rewire patterns through repetition. So when you consistently respond to your own distress with steadiness and reassurance instead of shame or guilt, then you start to build internal security. And when you start to validate your emotions instead of suppressing them, your body learns that feelings are not dangerous. And when you start to correct this behavior, instead of attacking yourself, your nervous system is going to stop associating mistakes with rejection. And this is where we really need to look at harsh self-talk. You know, if you could say, oh, of course I messed that up. I'll never be that disciplined. I always ruin things. And you say this over and over and over and over, the neuroplasticity that you have is going to make that true. You're going to believe that, and that is going to become 100% absolutely true. And yes, you will be somebody who always ruins things because you have told yourself that that's who you are. But if we want to heal this relationship with ourselves, we have to be aware of what we're saying and how we're talking to ourselves. And I want you to think about somebody that you love more than anybody else in the whole entire world. Or if you don't have anybody, think about, maybe your dog or your cat or your pet or something. Would you say these mean things to them? Would you say the mean things that you say to yourself to this person or this animal that you love more than anything in the entire world? No, of course not. And by thinking that, it kind of helps us catch the thoughts that have become so automatic and normal, but are damaging. So next time you think to yourself, oh, I mess stuff up all the time. I always do this. Would you say that to somebody that you love? Would you say to them, you always mess stuff up? No. So don't say it to yourself. And when you catch it, I want you to reframe it. Okay? Now, reframing isn't lying to yourself. It is just changing the relationship dynamic that you have with these thoughts. So, sorry, my nose itches a little bit. So if the thought is, I always mess things up, reframe that as, I made a mistake. But that's okay. Because guess what? Everybody makes mistakes. Every single person on this planet makes mistakes. Or if you think, she's better than I am, or he's better than I am, that person's better than me, you could reframe that as, wow, they've got strengths, or they're really good at that. But I have strengths too, and there's things that I'm really good at, because that's also true. Everybody's good at their own stuff. We can't all be good at everything. But your reframe has to be believable. You have to believe it, because you can't lie to your brain. You can't just make something up and have your brain believe it unless it is something that you genuinely believe, and say it to yourself over and over and over and over and over. Because if you genuinely believe that you mess everything up all the time, and you tell yourself over and over and over, I mess things up all the time, you're going to believe it. And that's not a lie to your brain. And it becomes true. So you need to take that, you need to reframe it as, I made a mistake and it's okay. And just constantly say this to yourself. Catch what you're doing, catch what you're saying, reframe it, and believe it, and say it over and over and over again every time. Now, self-love is a little bit of a vague term, and I feel like it's a little bit overused. So I'm going to say self-loyalty, because being loyal to yourself means that you don't disappear when things get hard. It means that you're not going to attack yourself when you're struggling, because that is an easy thing to do. If you are making a mistake, if you have made a massive mistake, it is easy to just be like, well, that's who I am, I'm screwed. You're struggling, that's not being loyal to yourself. You have to refuse to talk to yourself like that. Don't compare yourself to other people, their, curated life that they've got on the internet. Don't compare your everyday life to that, because it's gonna make you feel bad, because again, this is a highlight reel. And life is not like that. Again, everybody makes mistakes. Nobody's perfect. You need to refuse to talk to yourself in a negative way. And you don't have to become a different person. You just have to become somebody who's loyal to yourself first and puts your needs first. Because think about, if you've been on a plane, what is the first thing they tell you when they're talking about oxygen masks? Put your mask on first. Why? Well, because if you pass out because you can't breathe, how on earth are you going to help this person next to you who's maybe elderly or a small child put their mask on? You can't, because you've passed out and now you've killed both of you. It's the same with the relationship with yourself. Put your mask on first. Take care of your emotional needs first. That is the most important thing that I want you to take away from this today, is that you have to take care of you first. And maybe that sounds selfish, because you've been taught, especially if you are a woman, you've been taught that your needs come second. And that's just something that isn't outright said, but it is. And when little girls are growing up, we're taught this, like, don't be emotional, don't be this, don't be that, blah, 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 blah. Suppress your emotions, stop crying. You have to get out of, that you were taught. You have to put yourself first. I want you to go away from this today and do that and make that decision. And you have to make that decision yourself. Say it out loud, actually. Look in the mirror, tell yourself, be like, I'm going to put your needs first, because you are important. You have to be the most important person to yourself. Again, if you don't put your mask on first, you will pass out and you will kill you and the person that was depending on you. It's okay to set boundaries with people. I want you to set boundaries, because if you don't set boundaries, people are going to walk all over you and take advantage of you. And it's not that they're bad people, but because you haven't set a boundary with them, they don't know. They genuinely do not know. And they may not even know that they're taking advantage of you. Some people, maybe, but most people are not bad people, and they won't intentionally take advantage of you. But if you are constantly always doing something for somebody who's always asking you, and you don't want to do it, but you've never told them no, or you've never told them that you can't, and you haven't set that boundary, they have no idea. So setting boundaries is extremely important for your emotional well-being, and it's not selfish, because putting your emotional needs first is the most important thing that you could possibly do. When you build this strong relationship with yourself, you are going to then set the tone for every other relationship in your life. When you have a strong, healthy relationship with who you are, and you are confident in the person that you are kind to yourself, you take care of your emotional needs, you are genuinely in that secure attachment style, then every other relationship that you have in your life will be in that secure attachment style. And that's what I want for you. So I'm going to leave you guys with that. Walk away from here, putting yourself first, putting your needs first. Be a good person to yourself. You know, we always say be a good person to other people. Do that, but be a good person to yourself. Because that is of the most importance. All right, go and have a lovely rest of your evening, and I will see you guys again next week. Bye.